When Jesus took up the cross, the Virgin Mary transformed, and the 72 demons sent their leader. Can the priest still exorcise? 18 years ago, Father Agier performed his first exorcism but underestimated the demon's power and fell. Afterward, he repented daily and dreamed nightly. One day, he was startled awake by a nightmare, and just as he caught his breath, he heard a noise outside the door. Then the priest was pinned to the bed, feeling pressure, but the door opened. He struggled with all his might but found it futile. The bedsheet seemed off, as if something was inside, getting closer. The priest was terrified. Was it another dream? Rumor had it that the demon was pulling him. Fortunately, it was just a dream. At that moment, the phone rang. Something happened in the prison. A young girl was possessed again. As he stood, but a woman appeared. It was the girl possessed 18 years ago. She told the priest that the one in the cell was their daughter. She had become pregnant back then. The priest looked at the daughter's photo and sought help from the Vatican. He brought in a master who told him that as long as the mind has no gaps, the demon is just a moth. So the priest destroyed the videotape, wanting to erase his past self. Meanwhile, in the church, a nun was praying to Mary, but suddenly blood dripped from her forehead. When she looked up, the Virgin was gone. Following the blood trail, she found a red dot. Upon opening it, she saw a very red girl. The Virgin also began plotting. The nun was then pulled outside. The scene shifted to children sleeping. Suddenly, a crash was heard, scaring them. Shivering, the main door was covered. It was the plotting nun. She cornered the children and reached out her hand. At the critical moment, another nun tackled her, but the power difference was too great. The new nun was pinned to the ground, eyes rolling back. Fortunately, the priest and his master arrived. The master held a cross and shouted at the nun. Unable to resist, she turned to flee, but the disciple pinned her down. Together, they forced the nun back to her original form. But they knew this was just a minion. The real challenge was in the cell, where Baal, the leader of the 72 demons, was possessing someone. However, the master was highly skilled. He knew that as long as the mind had no gaps, there was no reason to fall, even if it was Lucifer. So he mocked and dismissed the demon, planning to leave, but the door was sealed. The demon provocatively stared at the master. The master wanted to speak, but the demon spat out demonic saliva. With a glare, the master knelt. The demon lunged and bit off the master's left ear. The accompanying doctor quickly administered a sedative. The demon fell asleep, but chaos erupted elsewhere. Prisoners were possessed, so the master and disciple evacuated everyone. The prisoners were sedated. They regrouped, planning to regain control, but they didn't know a prisoner had stolen the keys. The cell was already the demon's domain. The lights went out, and the master and disciple used flashlights to navigate the eerie corridor. But the demon wasn't in the cell. Was it on the ceiling? Luckily, it wasn't. Just as they reached the exit, the main door closed. The demon's target was the doctor. In the dark, the doctor wandered, hearing crying ahead. A prisoner was in a fog. The doctor skillfully took out a sedative and approached slowly. But a noise came from behind. Once settled, the master and disciple opened the door. In the dark, there was a sound like something heavy being dragged. They nervously clutched the cross. It turned out to be the accompanying doctor, who was already dazed. The possessed prisoners approached. The master raised the cross and shouted. The prisoners fell, but the disciple's voice was hoarse, and the other side was unharmed. Suddenly, a demonized Mary appeared. She reached out and then vanished. The master's cross turned red like a wave, but the old master was still sharp. In a flash, the master took out a larger cross, but the disciple was struggling. At the critical moment, the doctor used his last breath. The master and disciple raged, and the demon was immobilized. The master was ambushed. The disciple helped him up and they huddled together, strategizing. The master's condition worsened, and they hid in a storage room. The master suddenly sounded the alarm. He suspected the disciple was hiding something, otherwise they wouldn't be so passive. It turned out the disciple had concealed what he did to the possessed girl 18 years ago. The master realized the possessed girl was the disciple's daughter. Instantly deflated, he was about to wash away the blood. Before dying, the master told him, "If you are guilty and God won't walk with you, then you must believe you are God." After saying this, he despised the priest. Knowing his deep sins, the priest recorded everything on his phone and sent it to the Vatican. Then he opened the door, ready to face death. He picked up the cross again. This time, God chose to forgive. The demon howled as the truth assisted. But at the end of the corridor, a demonized Jesus appeared. He was completely transformed, coldly watching the priest. He threw away the cross and approached at a strange angle. The priest was startled but unafraid. Jesus climbed from the ground to the wall and lunged. But the priest was prepared. He shouted, "Heavenly might, undying!" The demonized Jesus was knocked to the ground. The priest poured holy water, venting his anger, but was ambushed. When he awoke, he was tied to a chair. The room was filled with demons. Baal burned the priest with a black cross and used demonic flames for reverse exorcism, intending to dissipate the priest's power. But the priest wouldn't sit idly by. Now he was all ready. The fog of demons cleared. He devoutly prayed for God's immense power, which surged like a tide. But the next second, Baal counterattacked. It seemed the louder the voice, the greater the power. So they entered a tug of war. One side shouted Jehovah's war, the other Lucifer's invincibility. Both sides were parched. Meanwhile, a demonized Mary sneaked into the children's fort. She attacked the bear girl. Her magic spread, causing many children to convulse. Baal, sharp-eyed, couldn't win verbally, so he acted directly. But the priest had a trump card. He used a spell to activate holy water. Baal was burned by the poison, but Mary had already taken control. She controlled all the children, using them as hostages. If the priest didn't disperse his power, they would all perish. The priest was in agony. His daughter, himself, and many innocent children, he didn't know what to choose. But time was running out. The children's condition worsened. Finally, the priest compromised. He could sacrifice himself, but his daughter and the children must be safe. The deal was struck. The demonized Mary instantly lost her power. The demons retreated, and the battle ended. The children were unharmed, and the priest saved his daughter. His deeds spread widely, earning admiration. The Vatican's ambassador came to congratulate him. His daughter held his hand, but it wasn't that simple. The ambassador congratulated the great Baal's return. The priest's golden eyes confirmed it all. It seemed the priesthood had long been infiltrated. Among the crowd, the daughter wasn't simple either. Green eyes flashed, the mark of the red angel. Suddenly, the stone rose, and the Vatican was on the table. Jesus was punished again. Angels and demons reached an agreement not to fight directly. 30 coins were collected and bestowed. 30 years passed. In a small town, a cow led the little ones, but it was a person. The story begins.